Hello, I want to welcome you to yet another important area of rural sociology. This is an area that deals with land. We want to focus on the various types of land tenure systems by not only understanding what they are, but also looking at their strengths and weaknesses. Our previous discussion on land showed that land is a very, very important thing or resource because it plays both political, social, economic, and even cultural values to a community, to a country, and even individuals. That is why today we want to continue the discussion around land by understanding what is meant by land tenure systems and the various types of land tenure systems that exist. We will also look at the strengths and weaknesses of each of these systems. So I want to welcome you to this very, very important and exciting discussion. Uh, let's begin by having an understanding of what is meant by land tenure. By land tenure, we mean the rules that have been invented by societies to regulate human behavior towards ownership and use of land, and also resources that are related to land or land-based resources, such as forests, water, minerals, among others. These rules stipulate how people are allocated land, how people access land, how land can be transferred from one person to another, and also the responsibilities that individuals and groups have over land. And the rules also restrains or rather stipulates what can be done and what cannot be done on any given piece of land based on the kind of land tenure system that exists. Land tenure relationships or land tenure systems may be enforced by formal institutions such as courts of law or informal institutions such as customary structures in our communities, for instance, the elders. Formal institutions such as courts might regulate how land is used and how resources in land is utilized. For instance, in Kenya, we have Land and Environment Court that issues around land are adjudicated and then resolved. In some communities where traditional mechanisms are still employed to regulate the use of land, they still rely on communal structures such as elders or council of elders, whose knowledge and expertise around land is often utilized to resolve issues pertaining to land access and use. Now, land tenure systems are understood generally as institutions that regulate how land is used and how resources that exist in land are also used or utilized. Why is it important for us to have regulations about land, or what we call land tenure system? Why is it important? It is important for a number of reasons, and these reasons largely relate to what inappropriate use of land might lead us to, or why it is important for land to be used properly. So one of the reasons why land tenure systems become important is around the issues of food security. Food is a basic need that all societies need in sufficient amounts for them to exist and persist over the years. Therefore, individuals that have access to land are better placed to be food secure compared to their counterparts that are landless or that have no means of accessing land. That is why regulation around land tries as much as possible to have each and every individual that needs land for purposes of food production to have it. In some societies, land for purpose of food production is accessed free without payment of any money because people recognize that ability to produce food ensures continued existence of humanity. And therefore, any individual that seeks to get land for purposes of food production, livestock production, among others, they are normally granted the right of access and use of land. Land tenure system is also important because of environmental issues. We know, for instance, if we do not use land appropriately or embrace certain practices around land, then some of them could be harmful to the environment. That is why we have laws that regulate how land is used. Conservation areas are set aside, or land that are considered delicate in terms of being close to water bodies. There are prohibitions against certain activities to be carried on them. All these are meant to ensure that land is used in such a way that it continues to preserve the environment. Because land constitutes a significant component of the environment, and therefore, if it is not properly utilized, it can lead to environmental degradation. When degradation occurs, it reduces the ability of land to produce enough food and the ability of land to support wildlife, support livestock production, among other things. And in that case, therefore, you may have land that appears plentiful, but in terms of practice is completely unproductive. In that case, therefore, the pursuit of food security might not be achieved. But land tenure system also becomes handy because of issues of inclusion. There are certain tenure systems that exclude certain categories of members of society. Some of them might exclude women, they might exclude youth, or they might exclude persons with disability. And it's on this basis that issue of land tenure system becomes important. Because of equity and equality and the importance of land in terms of sustaining human survival, it becomes critical that the type of land tenure system that's adopted is inclusive so that women, the youth, persons with disability, and others have access and use of land. That way, then the element of empowerment and equitable development becomes now achievable. But of course, the importance of land is also manifested in the nature of conflicts. Competition over land and land-based resources is normally regulated by the adoption of a land tenure system that is appropriate to the various social, economic, and political realities of a given society. So that if we do not have land tenure system that responds to the changing needs of humanity, then it can lead to conflict. So that a land tenure system that alienates others completely can lead to grievances that, if not addressed properly, can lead to conflict, and even violence, leading to the death of humanity or death of people, as well as loss of property. Let us now look at some of the various types of land tenure systems. And one of them that I want us to look at is called communal land tenure. Communal land tenure refers to the ownership of land by an extended family, a clan, or a community, and in which members of a community have rights of access and use. In other words, when you talk about communal land tenure system, we refer to a system in which the land that's available, everybody or every member of the community, member of a clan, can have access to it in terms of its utilization. If they are farmers or agriculturalists, they can have access to it in terms of crop cultivation. If they are pastoralists, they can still have access to it in terms of having grazing rights. Customary land ownership therefore refers to the communal possession of right to use and allocate agricultural and grazing land by a group sharing the same cultural identity. The group that shares the same cultural identity could be a clan, it could be an extended family, or it could be a community. Thus, the extent of the rights to use land under communal tenure system depends on the agreement passed between the customary community and the person receiving the rights. In other words, an understanding under communal tenure system is created in which, although land is owned by everybody, individual members of that community still enjoy the rights to have access and use of that particular land. So what matters is a kind of rules and agreements that exist between the community as a corporate body and its individual members. Once individual members enjoy land, they are only required to ensure that they observe the regulations that have been stipulated by the communal users. Again, in community tenure system, the use, transfer and development, and even inheritance of land are traditionally managed according to communal needs rather than through payment. In other words, having land under communal system, you inherit it through a person that you're biologically or socially related to. And in that sense, it is not about the exchange of money, where people use money to buy a piece of land. No, transfer of land from one person to another is done through traditional means under cultural regulations that stipulates land transfer and inheritance according to a given community of land users. In some customer systems, land is regarded as sacred, and the role of members of that community is simply to offer stewardship of the land and to protect the interests of future generation. In other words, land is so much sacred that the users are required to use it while bearing in mind that there's a generation to come in future after them that might also want to use the same land. Therefore, they have to use that land in a more sustainable manner. Land tenure system under communal structure is managed by the customary laws. By customary law, we mean a body of rules and institutions that govern the way land and natural resources are held, managed, used, and also transacted. These are rules that have been used in a given community since time immemorial, and members of that community have considered them as useful and legitimate means of regulating and guiding human behavior and conduct towards land. Again, one of the main features of customary laws or customary tenure system is that they are largely unwritten. They are not written anywhere. They exist in the memories of its members, especially elders, because they have observed over the years how land is used, and therefore they understand practices that enhance access and sustainable use of land, and also that enhance peaceful coexistence among the land users. And those practices have been passed over from one generation to another. In customary law, they are based on local practices. Every community has its own practice, values, traditions, and culture on how it understands land, and again, how it grants access to land and use of land. They are also flexible, they're not fixed. They change or they're modified to suit the needs of the users from time to time. They're also negotiable, they're location specific, and they also include individual as well as group rights to use local land and resources. Land and land-based resources under communal tenure system is usually managed by a traditional ruler, a land priest, council of elders, or family or lineage head on behalf of the community. So when you talk about this system of land management or this system of land tenure system, we simply refer to a tenure system that is largely domiciled in communities and which utilizes community cultures, traditions, value systems, and belief systems in terms of how they use and manage land as well as land-based resources. Now, like I noted earlier, each of these land tenure systems, they have certain strengths, but they also have certain weaknesses. So I want us to look at the strengths and weaknesses of these tenure systems. So let's start by looking at the communal land tenure system in terms of its strengths. Experts and individuals that are familiar with communal tenure system argue that the system allows for flexibility in farming and grazing patterns, since collective ownership of land enables community to adapt their land use practices to suit the needs of the local economy and consumer preferences. So that element of flexibility becomes important, so that if from time to time uh, members agree that they need to utilize a given piece of land for, say, conserving forest, then as long as an agreement is reached and all members agree to it, then that is the direction that the users will take. Again, one other strength is that it enables communities to implement comprehensive land use plans, such as irrigation scheme, cattle ranching, and conservation. And this leads to effective utilization of land resources. Because land is collectively owned, it is easier for members of such or the ownership of such land to agree on how serious comprehensive use of that land can be done. And that is why in some cases such land permits the use of irrigation. They lead to establishment of large cattle ranches, and even others are designated as conservation areas. Now, when this is done, it leads to effective utilization of resources in the sense that a given communal land will have certain places designated for settlements. Others are designated as grazing areas or farming areas, and others are designated as conservation areas. Other sites might also, because of their cultural values, might even be designated as shrines that communities would often visit when they want to carry out certain sacrifices or when they want to engage in communication with the supernatural. The other advantage or the other strength of communal land tenure system is that it minimizes land fragmentation, as collective ownership of land makes it hard to be divided into smaller plots, which ensures grazing land remains in larger parcels. Indeed, private tenure system, people divide land so that each individual has land that's assigned to him or her individually. But communal land tenure system, the land remains vast and it is not parceled into small pieces. It remains large and therefore it permits the use large-scale production of agricultural activities or even livestock production. So if compared to communities where land has now been individualized to those where land is still used communally, it is clear that under communal land tenure system, there are still large chunks of land because such communities have not subdivided their lands into small pieces and awarded them or granted them to individual users. We also notice that the problem of landlessness is reduced or eliminated under communal land tenure system, since every member of the community has access to land for their livelihoods. What happens in other areas where land has been commercialized, it means therefore if you don't have money to buy the land, then you remain landless. But under communal system, because land belongs to everybody else, then as long as you're a member of that community, then you also own land and you can use that land to advance your livelihood. So the issue of landlessness is either reduced or completely eliminated. But this type of tenure system also has certain weaknesses. One of the weaknesses is the fact that it can only be practiced effectively where land is abundant. Otherwise, if land has become small, competition becomes high, and because of that, it becomes a little bit difficult for such pieces of land to be maintained without subdivision. Again, it's only possible again where there is an element of flexibility in access and use of land. Otherwise, where population is growing and there is pressure on land, then the communal tenure system can be extremely difficult to practice. The other weakness of this system is that it is increasingly being pervaded by self-interest by traditional authorities, especially in communities that are experiencing rapid population growth and demand for land by outsiders. It should be noted that the traditional council of elders or traditional chiefs or rulers, as it were then, might not be the kind that we have today. It should be noted that elders of the golden days were selfless, was straightforward, were trustworthy, and were focused. And therefore, every decision they made was in the interest of the entire community. This is not the case with modern day elders. Indeed, several studies have shown that elders' prestige has drastically reduced in some communities because they have become selfish, they have become money-minded, and they are no longer making decisions that serve the wider interests of the community, but decisions that serve themselves and their cronies. So because of the lessening because of the continued erosion of of traditional authorities and institutions, the management of communal land tenure system is facing significant challenges. The other weakness of communal tenure system is that it is sometimes associated with the lack of transparency and accountability in the implementation, leading to encroachment of customary lands by powerful individuals. Indeed, if somebody were to take a walk or to visit some of the pastoralist communities in Kenya, you will notice that within those communities, we have powerful politicians, powerful businessmen that own large tracts of land, despite the existence of strong council of elders or traditional institutions that ought to have stood up to the challenges of managing land. Again, it is sometimes possible to find that most of these encroachers were facilitated by elders that live in those communities. So because of that, it becomes quite difficult. So the element of transparency and accountability that used to characterize the management of communal tenancy of land under communal tenure system is fast fading, and in its place, corruption, partisanship have taken center stage. Lastly, communal tenure system perpetuate discrimination by excluding certain sections of society, such as women, persons with disability, and even youth, in access and use of land. When you look at communal system, they are systems that are developed and managed under the institution of patriarchy, and men take center stage when it comes to the appropriation of land. And in that case, therefore, women and children, even youth, as well as persons with disability, they are normally sidestepped when major decisions about land are being made, even if such decisions might affect them currently or in future. So the element of exclusion or discrimination is a major weakness that is being found in communities or in societies where a communal tenure system is used. The other type of land tenure system is called the private tenure. Now, private land is the one which is assigned to an individual, a married couple, a group of people, or a corporate body, such as a bank, a private school, among others. That's what we mean by private land tenure. Now, private tenure vests ownership of land and use in the hands of individuals, companies, or non-governmental institutions that own them. For example, in a community, individuals may have exclusive rights to residential areas, agricultural land, or a commercial building that sits on the land that they own. That means that other people cannot use these resources without the consent of the owners of the right holders. So private tenure simply mean regulations that govern how land is accessed, used, and transferred from one individual to another individual. That is the private owners. So when you talk of this system, we simply mean land that is held by individual and for which such individuals have exclusive rights over their access and use. And anyone who wishes to use such land must seek express permission from the owners of such land or property. This system of land tenure also has certain strengths. but it also has certain weaknesses, as we are going to see. One of the strengths of this system is that it's a central component of conservation efforts, and it can allow for the protection and preservation of natural resources and landscapes. Because individuals are the landowners and they have the exclusive right over access and use of such land, if they choose to use that land in a manner that leads to conservation environment, then it is possible because it simply needs their own permission and their own effort. And therefore, if that direction is taken, then private landowner system can lead to significant conservation environment. But number two, it is also essential for individual freedom, financial independence, and even prosperity. That is, the freedom to use land for any purpose that the broader regulations governing land permits becomes quite important. And through this, they can gain financial independence. For instance, if they were to use or engage in serious commercial farming for purposes of income generating activities, then over time, they can become financially independent. And in the process, they can become prosperous. Private property also provide individuals with exclusive rights to use and dispose of their property, which can lead to economic growth and development. I think this is partly what I've already explained earlier, that when land is solely under the ownership of an individual, then that individual can find innovative ways of using the same piece of land to gain income, and through the accumulated income, the person can use whatever income generated from a given piece of land to buy and accumulate other forms of wealth other than land. Lastly, private tenure facilitates farm mechanization, the use of land as collateral to access credit, and even diversified uses. When land is under communal tenure, it becomes very difficult for such land to be put under farm mechanization unless the owners collectively agree to it. But because under private system, the land belongs to an individual, it is quite easier for the same individual to organize on how land can be used in mechanized farming. Again, individuals can also offer land as a collateral when they want to access credit in banks and other financial institutions. And the process, they can use what they get as credit to introduce other equally income generating activities on the same piece of land. And this can lead to diversification of uses as well as diversification of income generation. So private tenure is important based on those three strengths. This system also has certain weaknesses. One is that private ownership has been associated with political corruption and profit-driven motives, some of which are detrimental to the environment or indigenous communities. Quite clearly, when we look around, for instance, in Kenya, the biggest private landowners are in one way or the other politicians, and much of the land that they owned it through the influence of their political offices. It was not out of hard work, and even some pieces of land were just grabbed. Once they have grabbed them, they facilitated for title deeds to give them sole ownership of such pieces of land. So private land tenure system can actually breed corruption and also profit-driven motives. For instance, engagement in activities that could be detrimental to the environment or to the indigenous communities. For instance, an extensive visit of pastoral communities would find that serious agricultural activities, complete with mechanization and modern farming activities, are in place. Some use helicopters to spray fertilizer, to spray chemicals, pesticides, among others. And sometimes such chemicals are washed into the water bodies, which are later on consumed by livestock, or some uh, are blown by wind to grazing areas, thereby the degrading pasture or making pasture not suitable for livestock production. Private ownership is also a source of inequality since it creates wide gap between the haves and the have-nots, and by doing so, it bestows landowners the political machinery to do things as they wish. Land is a factor of production, and therefore owning land gives individual landowners the leeway to enhance their economic wealth because they can use such land for agricultural production. They can use such lands to secure huge loans or huge credits from banks and use the same to do other things. That means, therefore, the more land you have, the more economically distant you are from those who either have very little land or have no land at all. That's why land is seen as a means of widening economic inequality. The other issue that is also considered a weakness of private tenure system is that some of the private land remains unutilized for several decades, despite the overwhelming need for land for agriculture and livestock production. In Kenya, for instance, if somebody takes a walk at the coast, then there is quite huge chunks of land with the people we call absentee landlords. The owners are not known. The land lies fallow, yet people who want to engage in farming activities cannot do so because they are landless. But even amidst this, plenty of land exists, not cultivated, no livestock production going on, and therefore the economic value of such land becomes completely non-existent. That becomes a huge, huge problem that has been noted as being a major weakness of the private land tenure system. The last thing that we want to look at is public tenure, or what we call public land. Public land is generally land which central or decentralized government holds in trust on behalf of citizens, and they include lands such as forest lands. So any land that government or governmental institution hold on behalf of the citizens would be called public land. For example, water bodies such as streams, rivers, lakes, oceans, and even dams that are constructed by government or naturally exist. They all belong to the state, and land with significant reserves of minerals and precious metals also belong to the state, and therefore they qualify as public land. But the state also owns land where public institutions such as schools, hospitals, and security facilities are built. Roads, electricity, and water infrastructure such as pipes, dams, and even canals. All these are also public land because these are public institutions and these are government institutions, so that is also public land. Public land also exists at the level of national conservation areas, and such lands are normally managed by specialized agencies, like in Kenya, the game parks, the game reserves, all are managed by specialized agencies, and they serve as important sources of recreation and leisure. So such enjoyment of leisure is there for both present and future generations. So all game parks, national reserves, among others, are national, or rather are owned on behalf of Kenyans by the state, and therefore they are public land. Land where national monuments also stand are also public land because they protect specific natural, cultural, or historic feature, and they are preserved so that present and future generations can commemorate and can identify with them, understand historical events that happened in the life of a given nation. National memorials, which are basically sites that commemorate a historical person or tragic events, are also public land. I want to thank you so much for your time and for listening. We will have more discussion on land, especially areas to do with land tenure security. Thank you so much for your time.